Hey everybody, it's Joric. Welcome back. I hope you're doing great wherever you are in the world. Today, I wanted to make this video about the NHR program, really the original and the 1.0, if you will, just talking a little bit about the history and maybe some of the impact that it has had, good or bad, on people moving to Portugal, and then also just kind of my opinion on maybe how it's impacted housing and some of the cost of living for those that live in Portugal. So let's get into it here. For many of you that are watching this, you may have the NHR yourself. If you're watching this and you haven't started your move to Portugal, there's now a very narrow area where you could still apply for this NHR, but it has to be under some heavily modified rules compared to the original 1.0 version. So it came into effect in 2009, and essentially at that time, if you were a pensioner and you wanted to move to Portugal, it would allow you that you are not going to pay any Portuguese tax at all, 0% for up to 10 years. And then if you stayed in Portugal for 10 years, starting year 11 and on, then you would be at the normal tax rates. If you were working in Portugal, it was 20%. So that is where it was going to be. And that was very easy. So that's still much less, depending on what your salary is or what your wage was. If you're going to be living there, that tax generally lower than what you would be if you were taxed normally in Portugal. So I believe at that time it was really seen as an incentive to get not so much retirees or pensioners moving, but more working people that would help the workforce, because it's an aging population in Portugal. It's also, there's a percentage of the workforce that's leaving for better work and better wages and better living conditions abroad. Not necessarily in 2009, 2010, whatnot, but certainly after 2012, their financial crisis, that was certainly the case. But as it continued to grow and more people learned about this tax scheme, as it's called, the NHR, the non-habitual resident regime, became really popular with pensioners and not so much with people that were looking to work in Portugal. Getting a job in Portugal is very difficult if you're in I'll call it a corporate or a white collar job. If you want to do serving in a restaurant, you want to work in housekeeping, you want a minimum wage job, there are some availabilities, but still there aren't a lot out there where you're just going to be able to get something. It's very difficult. But if you're working in a corporate setting, like in our case, you almost have to get a transfer in from your multinational company to be able to work there. It's extremely difficult. But I want to show you here, but by 2019, so we happen to move in 2019, work visa, there were around 27,000 people, a little over, that had enrolled in NHR. And I wanted to show this here. Less than 8% were high value and professionals. And what I mean by that, or what I'm guessing they meant by that, was workers and working at companies making a higher wage or higher salary. So even though that 20% is less than what they would normally be taxed in Portugal, it was still more, so that way it was helping the Portuguese government with taxes. But the lion's share of this 27,000 5 years ago were pensioners. And then because of that, and I truly think, much like the golden visa, I think it was meant, the intention was good. Portugal thought that they were going to create a lot of jobs, meaning a lot of entrepreneurs were going to come into the country, start businesses, and hire 10 or more employees, and that was going to help kickstart the economy. Didn't happen that way. The NHR, I also think the intention behind that was to get people to work and have foreign investment come in, not for real estate and not for retirement reasons, but to help kickstart their economy and get businesses built and booming and get the economy going again. I really think that that was the case. But in 2020, they did make a change to where if you're working, it was still 20%. But if you're a retiree, a pensioner, the taxes in Portugal were going to go from 0 to 10%. And I think that that probably made sense because most of the people going in under the NHR and applying and getting it were retirees, not so much people still in the workforce. But in late 2023, former Prime Minister Costa, just because of housing, and that was, I think, golden visa changes were stated because of housing, NHR changes were stated because of housing, basically got rid of the NHR as people knew it. 10% for retirees. Some were still doing the 0%, or 20% if you're in the workforce. So then, as of 2024, you're really looking at, you're in the whatever the progressive tax rates are in Portugal, that's what you would be paying if indeed you owed Portugal taxes. Not everybody does. So this is where things get really interesting because for me, I think the NHR has been more divisive than the golden visa, and oftentimes our neighbors, for example, they were all Portuguese. No one knew about the NHR. We explained it to them and they kind of thought, well, that's weird. But they didn't know it or pay attention or care at all that we were paying, or at least they verbally didn't say they cared, that we were paying a lower rate often than what they were paying. But the NHR is one of those topics that if you make a video, you're at a social function and you bring it up, there's definitely the for and against. There's very little middle ground to talk about there. And so with that, Portugal made a change to now it's called the 2.0. It's very narrow who can qualify. For me, I keep thinking they should have just got rid of it altogether as opposed to modifying it, but it is what it is. So 2019, you're looking a little under 28,000, 27,367 were beneficiaries or people that were in the program, so to speak. But by mid-2023, and looking at a snapshot at the end of 2023, so this is encapsulating everyone that would be under the original NHR as it was originally designed, 89,000 people were active, and it's still, I have a hard time getting 2024 information and data, but almost 90,000 people are taking advantage of the NHR. And you're looking at the immigrant population of 1.1 million or so, give or take. That may be a little more based upon the statistics that we're finding. So, roughly 10%, maybe not quite 10% of the population was taking advantage of the NHR. But it does seem like many people from English-speaking countries, so specifically the United States, Canada, the UK, may have taken advantage of this. So what does this mean for things like housing? So I don't know that the NHR itself, it's definitely been a bigger hook, I think, for people that wanted to move to Portugal, at least the original NHR. And if you're looking at almost 90,000 people that are taking advantage of it, and I'm going to assume that there's still most of those people, if not a little more, that are signed up with it, that got in under that window where they could still get the original NHR before it was modified. That let's say you're looking at 100,000 people, give or take. Probably most of those people are paying rents or buying property in Portugal. And that percentage there, that amount of people coming in and buying probably a lot of newer property, newly renovated property. There may be some people that invested in some fixer-uppers or some things that needed work, either buildings or commercial property or flats, apartments, homes out in a more rural area. But I would imagine most of those people that came in have move-in ready apartments that they moved into and paid a premium for. As well as if they're looking at buying property, more likely than not bought property that was at the higher end of the scale, meaning more move-in ready, less fixer-upper work that needed to be done. And so that does play an impact when it comes to the housing crisis. So I do think that what Portugal, the decision to make changes is probably the right one for the country to be able to, there's many levers that impact housing. This isn't one of them, but it's one that definitely the tax benefit, big attraction, big beacon, come to Portugal and pay less tax. And it does, I think one could argue that and state logically that it has impacted the housing market in a negative fashion, even though there's hundreds of thousands of property that could be renovated or in hands due to inheritance laws. They're not out there being actively rented or sold. But it's interesting because I wanted you to see this information. And what do you make of it? If you made it this far in the video, does any of this information surprise you? If you've been a part of the NHR program, do you feel like it worked for you or didn't or is working? Do you also, could you feel guilty at all for being able to do something the government allowed, so it's legal, you were allowed to do it, but the people of Portugal were not able to take advantage of it. We were kind of in that lot that it was available to us, and even our attorney, who was Portuguese, said you should take advantage of this, so we signed up for it. But we also realized that we were not trying to flaunt that or say, oh, we have NHR, knowing that there are many people in Portugal that were making less in salary but paying more in taxes based upon the progressive tax rates. So it is something that has always been, I think, kind of a contentious subject that people have talked about or have been unwilling to talk about. But I think it's fair to say that the NHR, certainly impacted housing in a specific way, because most of those people that probably are taking advantage of the NHR are maybe from countries that have the ability to pay a little more in a rent or pay a little more in a property price. So I'll talk about the property in another video, but this is one where I just wanted to see what you make of these numbers and get some opinions and get some maybe some feedback from you on, do you think the NHR should come back? It should have been modified years ago. What are your thoughts on the NHR? I'd love to hear them below. So as always, thank you so much for watching and enjoy your travels.